Bachelor party with my wife. Well, then, who the hell was it? The question seemed to echo around the room, and no one wanted to be the first to answer. Well, anyway, Kevin finally spoke up, as no one else in the room was ready to take the lead. If I understand all these rumors correctly, it seems that, it was one of our wives. He looked around at the other 7 guys sitting at a table in the local pub, all of them in their early 30s, and all of them, one by one, nodding in agreement with his words. Well, let's say, but it wasn't my wife, Tom said hastily. Mine didn't have tits that big, so it couldn't have been her. Several heads nodded in agreement, and several voices joined the consensus, which agreed that, no, Chloe, Tom's pretty wife, although extremely attractive as a slim model, simply could not be the woman in question. That girl's breasts were definitely bigger than Tom's wife's. And it couldn't have been my Mary, Fred joined the discussion with a laugh. Her breasts were damn sure bigger than the ones we'd all seen. No one argued with that remark either, for Mary's double DDs were well known, deeply respected, and truly admired by the whole fair company. Mary is the proud owner of a DD, that is a size 5 bust, JFC. Well, I don't think it was Julie, Alf said quietly, but his heart sank when most of the other boys looked at him questioningly. Why wouldn't it be Julie? Fred asked, winking at his mate and enjoying his discomfort. As I recall, that girl was about her height and build. Yeah, and her breasts were about the same size, Alf, Kevin added with a grin on his face. I remember what they looked like when she went topless on vacation last year. What did they look like then, Kevin? Tom wondered, adding to poor Alf's embarrassment. They were so round and... Hey, you lot, shut up! Stop talking about my wife, Alf said, loudly interrupting the entertaining discussion. I'm her husband, and I'm sure she wouldn't strip naked in front of a room full of horny guys. Last year, she got naked on the beach, Kevin reminded him with amusement. It looked to me like she'd enjoyed showing off her treasures there. It's not the same thing. What we're talking about here is different, Alf argued vehemently. She just wouldn't undress like that, and she certainly wouldn't let you grope her breasts like that girl did. Alf paused, hoping that his buddies would leave the subject of his very attractive wife Julie out of it. He hadn't given it much thought that night, but come to think of it, that girl's boobs really did look like his Julie's. You guys seriously think one of our wives would do that? Mike interjected, adding his first line to the discussion. Do you think I could imagine my Penny doing that? There was silence around the table as they all pondered Mike's words. The girl at the bachelor party was blonde, but she was clearly wearing a wig, and the mask she wore seemed just part of the performance at the time. Who remembers what color her pubic hair was? Tom asked, breaking the silence and throwing in a question they were all pondering. Well, at least that's what half of them were thinking, dreading what the answer might be. I'll be damned if I know, someone muttered. Personally, I was too drunk to pay attention to such a small thing. I don't think she took her panties off, Bill commented, though they were so tiny they couldn't have hidden a big bush. So she was shaved there? Fred asked, addressing everyone present. There was a lot of shaking of heads and even more of a lot of broken sighs. The truth was that by the time that girl, probably one of their wives, had performed, they were all mostly too drunk to perceive the fine details of the show she had put on. No, it wasn't completely smooth, but she had everything neatly trimmed down there. Kevin again provided valuable information, who was taking no chances, knowing full well that his own wife had real bushy thickets. How the hell do you know that, Kevin? She hasn't taken her panties off all night, came a distrustful voice. The dirty pig had his hand down the front of her thong, Fred told the motley crew with a chuckle. I saw him grab that chick's pussy with his handful while Todd was kissing her. Kevin shrugged, ignoring the comment that the girl didn't seem to mind his advances at the time. He prudently failed to mention whether he would have done the same if he had known she was the wife of one of his buddies. All I can say, Ted shared the information with his friends, is that her breasts felt different to the touch than my Sandy's. They seemed kind of firm and, not too big, but, really nice, but not like my Sandy's, he hastened to add. Everyone turned their heads and looked at Ted, taking in his words, remembering their own impressions and recognizing that what he had said was true. Sandy boasted a nice pair of her girls, but they were still starting to blur a bit, while the girls' perky breasts were very firm and standing up, without the slightest hint of sagging. TA Girl let them all have a quick feel of herself, and some were even allowed to go a little farther. Some, apparently to improve their memory, even put their hands out on the table and wiggled their fingers, squeezing the air. All of them, or at least most of them, wondered for a moment if those juicy boobs just a week ago, on that fantastic night, had really felt the same as their own wives' breasts. Another minute of reflection followed, during which some of the men pondered whether they even wanted to continue the conversation further. Wouldn't a few more revelations from their buddies lead to excruciating awkwardness, or even possibly trouble in their marriages? "This is a weird bachelor party," Kevin finally said. "I never thought we'd be sitting here talking about anything, and who?" "What happened to the girl we ordered?" Alf asked. "Who the fuck knows?" answered Ted. "All I know is that they called us at the last minute and said her car broke down on the freeway and she couldn't make it." "And then that blonde girl showed up," Mike interjected again. "Well, who in that case invited her?" All the guys looked at each other suspiciously, one after another snickering and shaking their heads. None of them was ready to admit that they knew anything about this newfangled understudy of a real call girl. "And by the way, who was it who blabbed that it was one of our women?" Kevin exclaimed when he'd had enough of the staring game. He was always inclined to take the initiative. "Well, you told me so yourself," Alf retorted. "But I thought you told me that Mike told you," Kevin said. "Wait, maybe I did, but—" Mike put up his hand. "It was you, wasn't it, Ted? Who told me?" "No way, I didn't," Ted protested, feeling unfairly accused. "I didn't tell anyone at all. The first time I heard about it was last night in the pub, from Bill. And again, for the umpteenth time, they all stared at each other like sheep at a new gate." "Maybe it wasn't one of our wives, after all," Todd suggested nervously, joining the conversation for the first time. Todd secretly feared that Carrie, his very sexy blonde wife, might well have been so wild that she would have risked getting naked in front of all his buddies. "Where did that girl come from, then?" Fred asked again, bringing them all back to reality. "Because she obviously didn't come from the agency, that's for sure." "God only knows who it was," Tom replied thoughtfully. "Maybe we'll never know." "Maybe it's for the best if we never find out," Kevin commented thoughtfully, and many people nodded, though by then some of them were more concerned than others, even if they tried not to show it. "More beer, anyone?" Mike offered enthusiastically. "Yes, and my throat is dry from all this talk." The crowd cheered him on. "Whose round is it now?" The topic of conversation again turned to soccer, although the level of interest in it was lower than usual. After all, even though Arsenal's chances in the upcoming weekend were of paramount importance, it was hard for the lads to concentrate when the question of whose almost completely naked wife you had just groped was at the forefront of their minds. And even more, some of them were tormented wondering if all their buddies were having free fun with his own wife. "Hey, girls, where are the others?" "They're gone this week, Penny," Carrie replied. "Chloe and Sandy are out of town, and Sue—" "Well, we all know what Sue will be doing, don't we?" She grinned. "God, Bill would kill her if he found out she was seeing her boss after hours." "Dating her boss after hours?" Carrie asked with raised eyebrows. "Is that such a polite way to describe what they do?" She made air quotes on the last word. The entire female company agreed with her, thinking Sue a fool for getting involved with another man when she had a wonderful husband like Bill at home. If Bill had known that she was with her boss that night when all the guys were at the bachelor party, well, I guess then he probably would have jumped that girl they were all talking about, Julie said. Perhaps the only one who took a harsher view of her friend's actions than the others. "Speaking of that girl," Mary picked up on that, "have any of you heard that ridiculous rumor yet?" "Well, that the real stripper never showed up and that one of us took her place." "What?" Julie exclaimed. "One of us?" Is this some kind of stupid joke or what? Well, I heard the same thing from Kevin this morning, Joan interjected, remembering how much her husband had enjoyed telling her about it. Apparently, they all thought one of us had taken the place of that girl when she broke down on the freeway, she giggled, looking curiously around at her circle of married friends. Well, it wasn't me! Believe me, Julie said angrily. I'd rather die than get naked in front of a bunch of those guys and drunk. All the other wives' eyes crossed on her. They weren't too surprised at her outburst, as Julie had a reputation for being a bit of a prude. Oh, wait, would any of you do that? Julie's eyes widened in disbelief as she saw all the other ladies smirking at her. Well, at this point, the entire company turned their attention in surprise to Carrie, who had caught everyone's attention with one word. Well, what, Carrie? Speak up, Mary urged her on, expressing her general impatience. Well, I've been thinking about it ever since Todd told me a couple of nights ago, Carrie began. Honestly, I feel a thrill just thinking about it, and— So it was you, Carrie? Julie interrupted her, intrigued. No, it wasn't me. Look, girls, I didn't say it was me, although to be honest, I wish it had happened to me. All I said was that the thought of doing this turns me on, Carrie admitted, blushing slightly. She looked around at the others, realizing that they were all eagerly waiting for her to continue. Can you imagine that? Doesn't the thought of stripping naked in front of your husband and a bunch of his buddies turn you on? Even the admitted prude Julie didn't risk denying that the thought of it could turn even her on. But how would you live with it, Carrie? Asked the blushing Mary, who seemed a little more taken with the idea than the others. Well, it's all about how it would happen, Carrie explained. If you were wearing a mask and they couldn't know who they were, then you could act like a stripper, completely naked, unafraid of anything, and none of them would ever guess anything. What about your husband? Joan interjected. Surely he would have known about it, wouldn't he? Of course he'd know, you fool, Carrie snorted. He'd be okay with it, and anyway, if it were me, I'd want him around if things got out of hand. It would be even more fun if things got out of control, Penny suggested with a jump, and the others joined her in laughing loudly. Gosh, you're right, Carrie, Mary exclaimed excitedly. Girls, can you just imagine that you're standing there completely naked and there's, 8 handsome men staring lustfully at your exposed breasts and naked. Oh, for God's sake, Mary, shut up, please, shouted an extremely flushed Joan. You've already turned me on enough and my Kevin won't be home until later tonight. Stop it. No, go on, Penny objected. Your words make it seem so, real, baby. Ha, maybe not just staring, Mary continued, smiling cheekily at the others. Imagine this. Imagine this. You walk up to them, swaying your hips, rubbing your nakedness against them, ruffling their hair with your fingers to get them excited. And all the while you're standing there in front of them, walking from one to the other, completely naked, with all your stuff on display. Oh, and me. I'd never take my stilettos off if I was going to do that, Carrie, the most overtly daring of the group, said. According to Todd, they make my legs look so long and sexy. Carrie put one of her legs out from under the table and stretched it out parallel to the floor, twisting her foot, examining it critically, and letting the other ladies appreciate her smooth, firm calves and high rise. Some of the buddies even got up from their seats and leaned over the table to get a better look. Well, if I had a choice between losing my panties or my high heels, I'd give up my panties, Carrie said firmly. Everyone else laughed out loud, enjoying their own naughty thoughts swirling around in their heads. They'd touch you if you let them, wouldn't they? Julie added with a huff, developing a fascinating fantasy that captured the minds of the entire female company at the table. So many men's hands, and they'd all be touching you and stroking you, everywhere, all over your body. Oh, my God, Carrie mumbled hoarsely to herself, who had started it all. Imagine standing there naked with 8 cute guys hanging around you. They're touching you, stroking your body, fondling your breasts. Oh, God damn it, I'm on fire. Jesus almighty, find me a man, any man. Excited cries rang out one after another as the women's imaginations ran wild, offering ever more daring pictures. 8 pairs of hands. Wow! 16 strong, muscular arms roaming over my burning body. This, God. Just imagine 2 of them tying my hands behind me and the rest of them at the same time using my naked body while I'm helpless and can't fight them off. The imagination of the ladies, who were now hard to recognize as hitherto humble housewives, really went wild. "Joanne!" Julie exclaimed loudly, shouting over the excited clamor of the other ladies and silencing them all. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Who, me?" muttered poor Joan, realizing with panicked horror what she was doing right in front of her friends. You! What are you doing under the tablecloth, woman? You seem to be spoiling yourself, don't you?" Julie accused her friend threateningly. "No, Julie, I'm not. Yeah, well, I'm just, You put your hand down the front of your jeans, Joan," Julie gasped, amazed at her friend's disheveled appearance and actions. "She was just adjusting her panties." Carrie stepped in, coming to Joan's aid. "That's all. Big deal. I'm going to do the same thing." "Oh, I'm sorry," Julie said, embarrassed. "Look who's talking." Penny picked up wryly. "Why did you put your own hand under your blouse?" "Oh, I'm sorry," Julie mumbled, rather embarrassed, only now surprised to find where her right hand had gone, but not stopping her tweaking and rubbing. "God, why was it suddenly so hot in here?" It was unclear, though, exactly which of the women had exclaimed this. 8 women, attractive and young ladies, had gone home to their husbands that evening. 2 of them had returned from an out-of-town trip, completely unaware of what had happened in their absence. One of them returned to her loving husband, feeling very guilty and promising herself that her adultery was over forever. 4 of them returned home and gave their husbands the most erotic night of sexual pleasure each of them could recall in a long, long time. However, in the last house between husband and wife, things were a little different. "Hello, darling, did you have a good day?" She greeted him, giving him a peck on the cheek as he undressed. "Yes, sweetie. The guys couldn't stop talking about what you did at the bachelor party." Her husband grinned. "Wow, the girls were pretty into it too," she giggled, falling onto the soft couch in the living room. "Did any of them guess it was you, Bunny?" "I have no idea, honey, and I don't suppose any of the boys guessed either. I hope you didn't tell them." "Of course I didn't tell them," he assured her. "Good. Did they like my performance?" she asked flirtatiously. "Oh, of course they freaking loved it. You have no idea, honey," smiled broadly at her husband. "You were fantastic and so beautiful. I've always dreamed of showing your beautiful naked body to my friends. Glad to have been of help, my love. Happy you enjoyed my prank. I certainly enjoyed it." She stretched and squeezed her eyes shut with the pleasure of pleasant memories. "Just one thing, sweetheart. Did Kevin really stick his fingers in you?" "Oh, that was him, wasn't it? I was kind of hoping it was your hand." "No, it wasn't me." "Oh, sorry about that, darling," she said in an apologetic tone, making a regretful grimace. "Well, it went a little further than we planned, sweetheart. Why didn't you stop him?" "How could I have, love?" Todd kissed me. Bill sucked my left breast, and it seemed like at least 3 others were trying to get hold of the right one. Alf had both hands on my ass, but the main problem was that some asshole was trying to pull down my panties. I was pushing the rascal away as best I could, hoping you would help me. I'm sorry, honey," my husband mumbled. "Actually, the asshole who tried to steal your panties, well, that was me. My bad. I'm afraid I got a little carried away at the time." "You cheeky bastard!" She slapped him on the arm with feigned indignation. "Well, then you've got nothing to complain about, darling. You know that, don't you?" "I'm not complaining as long as you're okay with it." "Oh, honey, believe me, at that moment I didn't pay attention to what your friends were doing to me." She giggled, returning the dreamy smile to her face. "That's fine. I don't mind either, as long as you don't get too caught up in it all." What would be considered too much fun then? Never mind, sweetheart. Let's go to bed already, he suggested, and she agreed with her husband. Sometime later, in the dark, in the family bed. Would you do it again, honey? Not right away, of course, but sometime in the future. His voice rang out in the silence. I bet you'd like that. The darkness grinned at her playful tone. And you know, I'd be surprised if I couldn't get a whole troop of people to watch it, or even participate. The wife chuckled again. What? A posse? What the hell do you mean? Surprise mixed with obvious interest was heard from the other side of the bed. Never mind, dear, I was just remembering the other girls' reactions today. She jumped. Let's do something interesting, because I've got an itch, in there, and you need to scratch it again. Do it. I'll explain the rest in the morning. The end.